They said she was just a frail old volunteer, harmless and forgettable, until she saved a life using knowledge no one else possessed. If you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from, because this one is going to blow your mind. The hospital corridors buzzed with the quiet chaos of routine. Nurses hurried between rooms. The soft hum of machines accompanied the murmur of distant voices, and somewhere in the break room, a volunteer's presence went largely unnoticed. Irina Vulov stood near the coffee cart, her silver hair pulled into a neat bun, blue volunteer vest over a plain gray cardigan. To all appearances, she was just another harmless senior volunteer, pouring coffee and arranging magazines with careful, practiced motions. But there was something about the way she moved, measured, deliberate, like a dancer who remembered every step, even as other staff dismissed her as decoration. Paul Hendris, the charge medic, watched her from across the room. He noticed the scars tracing faded, symmetrical patterns along her forearms, burn marks he had seen once before, in places no hospital should ever have to see. He narrowed his eyes. "She's been through something," he muttered. "Something we don't know about." The day was dragging on uneventfully until an almost imperceptible sound, a faint mechanical clicking, echoed faintly down the hallway. No one else seemed to hear it, but Irina froze for a moment, her hands gripping the coffee cart handle just tight enough to betray a sudden tension. The sound was unmistakable to her, the old Soviet-era dosimeter, ticking in tiny, urgent beats like the heart of a secret. She veered the cart silently toward the source, a man in a lab coat, pale and sweating in the waiting room, his jacket hiding a strange device. The meter read 7 Röntgens, enough to cause acute radiation sickness that no ordinary hospital staff would recognize in time to save him. Irina knelt with quiet urgency beside the man, whispering truths that fell on deaf ears behind her. Bureaucratic voices telling her to step back, to not interfere, to remain a volunteer, not a doctor. But the truth was written in her steady hands, in the calm certainty of someone who had seen the dead and refused to let them go silently, that she was the only one who could save him. And so, while the others hesitated, she moved. This is Irina Vulov's story, one of invisibility and courage, of a past buried in radioactive shadows, and of the impossible choices that come with redemption. It begins here. If you're ready for more tales where quiet heroes step from the shadows, subscribe and turn on notifications. Now tell me, where are you watching from? Because this story is just getting started. Irina Vulov's fingers moved deftly, steady as a metronome, as she prepared a concoction of intravenous fluids in the cramped emergency room back corner. The room smelled sharply of antiseptic and despair, crowded with faces blank with pain or exhaustion. The tension threading through the staff was palpable, an unspoken war between those with deep-rooted skepticism and the compelling force of a woman no one wanted to notice but could no longer ignore. Paul Hendris paced nearby, shooting her occasional glances. "You're playing with fire, Irina. This isn't some volunteer hobby. You don't have the clearance for these treatments," he warned, voice low but firm. The usual hospital rules were a fortress, and she was blasting through the gates. She looked up briefly, her clear blue eyes steady but weary. "I passed through worse. I know what I'm doing." There was no need to explain. Her past whispered between her words like a half-buried secret. The patient on the table, a middle-aged engineer named Carlos with a faint bluish tint to his lips, began to convulse subtly, the early signs of radiation sickness stomping across his nervous system. The standard protocols had missed the contamination entirely. No alarms had sounded. No warnings had been raised. "You see this? His blood counts are crashing. We're skating on thin ice with standard care." Irina's voice cut through the room, quiet but carrying the weight of urgency. Dr. Marcus Webb, the hospital's leading ER physician, stepped forward, arms crossed, doubt in his eyes. "Irina, you're a volunteer. This is beyond your remit. Let us handle it." But this was her moment, her chance to prove what they still refused to believe. She injected a special mixture of fluids and meds, some sourced from obscure Soviet-era protocols no longer acknowledged, but effective against radiation's silent ravages. Her hands moved quickly, but with the assurance of someone who had, decades ago, been responsible for lives in far harsher fields. The nurses exchanged glances, uncertain but compelled by the results. Carlos's heartbeat steadied. His pallor improved, ever so slightly, but enough to turn the tide toward survival. Still, the hospital buzzed with murmurs and doubts. The authority that ruled the ER, Dr. Webb among them, refused to yield power to a volunteer, no matter how effective. Whispers circulated about playing God and overstepping lines. Yet, in the hallways, a few younger residents watched Irina with growing respect, their eyes wide with a sense of awe and rebellion. Meanwhile, the hospital's social media coordinator, Liam, captured a clip of Irina calmly administering care to Carlos. His phone lens caught her focused expression, her purposeful movements, and the tension in the room. The video, meant to highlight a joyful volunteer, took on a different meaning once shared online. The old woman wielding knowledge the system refused to accept. The video went viral among the hospital staff and beyond, igniting debates and polarized opinions. Some mocked, some admired, and others feared the disruption she represented. Irina remained untouched by the external noise, her focus fixed on her patients and the invisible war unfolding beneath sterile surfaces. As night fell, another call came in. An anonymous tip of a radiation leak nearby. The hospital's resources were stretched thin, and official protocols dictated caution and retreat. But Irina's eyes flashed with quiet determination. This was no ordinary volunteer role anymore. Her battle had just begun. The sirens pierced the afternoon calm with a relentless urgency, echoing through the sterile corridors of the military hospital. A mass casualty incident, a construction site collapse, was pushing the emergency room beyond its limits. The entire facility buzzed into controlled chaos, the sharp clatter of hurried footsteps mixing with shouted orders, and the beeping of monitors attempting to impose order on the unfolding disaster. Irina Vulov, no longer just the overlooked volunteer, stood resolute near the entrance to the trauma bay. Her volunteer vest had been replaced by freshly donned surgical scrubs, the fabric still crisp against her worn but steady hands. Around her, nurses and residents scrambled, their faces tight with anxiety, as they prepared for the critically injured flooding in from the collapse. The first ambulance screeched to a stop. Paramedics burst through the doors, pushing a gurney at a desperate pace. James Reed, a 34-year-old construction foreman, writhed on the stretcher, a massive section of rusted rebar impaling his abdomen, puncturing life with every shallow breath. His screams echoed off the sterile walls, the stark contrast to the calculated calm that had settled over Irina. Without hesitation, she moved toward him, her voice calm, authoritative, slicing through the chaos. "James, my name is Irina. I'm going to take care of you. Stay still." Her hands, precise and confident, assessed the wound swiftly with decades of experience embedded in every motion. The jagged steel, the blood loss, the precarious balance between life and death. Paul Hendris appeared at her side, wordlessly offering a suture kit and saline. Together they began stabilizing the foreman. Irina worked methodologically, irrigating the laceration, carefully debriding dead tissue, identifying and clamping the severed radial and ulnar arteries. Around them, the ER pulsed with activity. Oxygen tanks hissed, monitors wailed warnings, voices barked orders. The hospital's heart beating fiercely against the crush of calamity. Nearby, a young man named Martinez lay with his right arm mangled, tourniquet barely holding the hemorrhage at bay. His pale face registered a mix of shock and disbelief as Irina's steady hands reassured him in quiet, measured tones. "The tourniquet is your lifeline. Don't move. We will do everything to save what we can." Despite the overwhelming tide of injuries pouring in, Irina's calm did not falter. Her mind raced through training that no office had ever taught. Field hospital triage in war zones, improvised battlefield medicine, and the imperative to preserve every drop of life amidst shattered bodies. Dr. Marcus Webb, skeptical and watchful, whispered sharply from the sidelines. "Where did you learn to do that?" His gaze pierced her, a mix of disbelief and grudging respect. "Where resources are scarce and lives are precious," Irina replied softly, never breaking her focus. As another ambulance screamed up, the paramedics carried in a middle-aged man covered in concrete dust, conscious but disoriented. Paul's voice was tense. Possible internal bleeding, rigid abdomen. Mechanism suggests blunt force trauma. Irina's eyes flicked up, briefly meeting Webb's, a silent question unanswered. Suddenly, a call interrupted. A radiation exposure alert. Clinic protocols twisted further into uncertainty. Irina's expression hardened, her past creeping forward like a shadow she could no longer outrun. The hospital teetered on the edge, a grinding symphony of urgent decisions, medical improvisation, and unyielding tension. Irina Vulov was no longer invisible. She was the linchpin holding the fragile line between survival and disaster. But even as she saved lives with her steady hands and hard-earned wisdom, a storm was gathering. A storm that would force truth and recognition from the depths of silence. The clock ticked relentlessly toward the next crisis. The emergency room doors swung wide once more. And the battle was far from over. Irina Vulov stood at the threshold of the hospital's emergency department, her face set in a mask of quiet determination. The smell of antiseptic was sharp, mingling with the low hum of medical equipment and the distant echo of rushed footsteps. The radiation victims had arrived. 3 ambulances, one after the other. A somber procession of critical patients whose lives now depended on swift, precise medical intervention. Within seconds, the ER transformed from a place of routine care into a command center for a rare and deadly crisis. The air was thick with urgency, and the invisible threat that only a few could truly understand. A silent, relentless enemy called radiation. Irina's years of experience, buried under decades of obscurity, rose to the surface with fierce clarity. She moved quickly, issuing commands with the authority of someone who had lived through such disasters before. Prepare isolation rooms 4, 5, and 6. Set up controlled entries. No one enters without full protective gear and dosimeters. No one stays longer than 15 minutes. Rotate staff every quarter hour. Around her, nurses and residents followed her lead, donning hazmat suits and clipping on radiation meters. Paul Hendris, her trusted ally, coordinated staff rotations, his military precision matching her calm urgency. Complete blood counts on all patients now. Baselines are critical before lymphocyte counts crash, Irina instructed. Start wide-bore IV access, 2 lines each. Prussian blue ready for patients 1 and 2. DTPA for patient 3, the pregnant woman. Understand the difference. The baby has a chance only if we use DTPA. Whispers of doubt and confusion echoed from newer staff unfamiliar with such protocols. One resident hesitated. Shouldn't we focus on saving the mother? The fetus at 4 months is... Irina's gaze froze him mid-sentence. You will not make that choice. She will. We provide information. She decides. Not us. As the clock ticked, her mind flashed back to a bleak tent, 12 kilometers from a melting reactor core, where medical supplies were scarce and confessions of hopelessness common. Where every life saved came with a steep toll and agonizing choices were made daily. Where the pregnant women never survived. The physical strain was evident. Her hands trembled for a fraction of a second before she regained composure. She was not just administering treatment, she was confronting ghosts and a past steeped in loss. Patient 1, David Chen, a young nuclear physics graduate student, hung suspended just past the edge of hope, his blood count plummeting dangerously. Patient 2 trembled with neurological symptoms creeping in. Sophia Ruiz, the pregnant patient, faced the cruelest uncertainty with a fetal heart rate that swung wildly on the monitor. Outside isolation rooms, the hum of dosimeters beat a relentless percussion, tracking invisible waves of danger. Environmental health teams in full protective gear ensured contamination was contained, and lives preserved. Dr. Marcus Webb approached, holding his tablet like a shield. His earlier skepticism had waned, replaced by a mixture of awe and apprehension. The exposure level is closer to 10 Roentgens. Survival rates at this stage are grim, he muttered, voice low. We're in the prayer zone. Irina's reply was barely audible, but unshakable. Then we work. In the ensuing hours, the hospital became a battleground between science and the unknown, between cold protocols and the fierce will of those who refused to lose. As night deepened, The fragile hope shimmered in the eyes of those fighting for life, each heartbeat a victory, each breath a small defiance against the shadow of death. Irina Vulov, once invisible, now stood at the center, leading a fight with everything she had left. But the road ahead was long, and the war far from over. Irina Vulov sat quietly in the unadorned, dimly lit visitor's chair within Dr. Marcus Webb's leather-lined office. The tension in the air was thick, like the calm before a storm. Webb, pacing behind his imposing desk, radiated skepticism and controlled frustration. You don't get to diagnose patients here. You pour coffee, you smile, you make families feel welcome. That's your job. Anything else is unauthorized and dangerous. Irina's hands rested softly in her lap, expression unreadable but steady. Dr. Klein's condition deteriorates rapidly. He's ambulatory now, but without immediate chelation therapy, he dies. I am here because I've seen this before. Seen this before? Webb's footsteps slowed, gaze sharpening. Where exactly? His voice was a mixture of disbelief and veiled accusation. I didn't say I had a medical license here, Irina replied, voice quiet yet firm. But yes, I was a military doctor in the Soviet Union. I did what was necessary where modern medicine does not exist. A brief silence, broken only by the faint hum of the building's ventilation. Paul Hendris entered, looking exhausted but resolute. Webb, preliminary blood work for Dr. Klein is in. White count down to 2.1, lymphocytes at 890. He's dropping fast. His eyes flicked between them. Environmental health reports confirm he's still radioactive, hot enough that no one else can safely approach without protective gear. Webb's jaw tightened silently. Irina stood, voice calm, but urgent. I will lead treatment. I know the protocols for acute radiation syndrome because I lived them. Webb stared in disbelief. And how exactly did you know? He gestured toward the medical records, the charts, every sterile detail that pointed to absence of anyone qualified beyond the whitecoats here. Irina took a breath and met his gaze directly. I served in Afghanistan. Studied hematology under extreme conditions. More importantly, I was part of the medical teams dispatched to Chernobyl shortly after the reactor explosion. Mobile units working with burned firefighters, evacuees, children. No Prussian blue, no modern chelation therapy. Just morphine, hope, and grim determination. The things I treated then, I see now again. Webb's face paled. Chernobyl, that's 1986. You were there? I was. 8 months with a mobile medical unit operating 12 kilometers from the reactor core, dosimeters clicking constantly, protective gear failing. Irina lifted her sleeves, revealing faded scars tracing her forearms. The remnants of burns received treating a 3-year-old girl who had ingested cesium. The children we saved then, the ones we lost, especially pregnant women absorbing radiation into their fetuses. Her voice faltered for only a second before she regained control. Why come here? Why now? Webb asked, the weight of history sinking between them. Because it's happening again. Because I cannot watch history repeat itself. Because no one else here knows what 8 Röntgens means. Not the real meaning. I am the only one who can coordinate this treatment. The decisions will be agonizing, the patient's fragile. But we must try. A silence stretched, charged with unspoken truths and fears. Suddenly the door swung open. FBI agents entered, led by Diana Ortiz, cool and commanding. Dr. Vulov, she said crisply, we have questions. Classified documents link you to Soviet military medical units involved in radiation casualties. Orders disobeyed, lives saved against protocol. The directorate wants a full account. Irina's jaw tightened. I have told you what you need to know. I defected in 1987, tried to leave the past behind. Agent Ortiz's gaze was relentless. That past has followed you. We intend to understand your role, especially your connection to those now seeking answers from this hospital. The conflict between institutional secrecy and personal redemption crystallized in the sterile room. Irina stood resilient, knowing her buried truths would soon surface, along with the lives she was fighting to save. Outside the walls, the hospital prepared for the next crisis. Unaware their quiet volunteer hid a legacy of courage, betrayal, and secrets that could ignite a storm far larger than any medical emergency. And for Irina Vulov, the reckoning had only just begun. Irina Vulov's office, once her sanctuary, became a front line in a different kind of battle. The austere room was tense, charged with unspoken accusations, as FBI agent Diana Ortiz laid out confidential files gathered over weeks of investigation. "Dr. Vulov," Ortiz began, her voice crisp and unwavering, "we're aware of your history in Soviet military medical units, especially your role in radiation casualties during and after Chernobyl. Classified documents describe disobedience of orders to save lives that were to be sacrificed. Now, we're trying to understand this fully, and why your name is linked to ongoing investigations." Irina's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "I acted under oath to save lives. That history is no secret worth burying. It's a record of courage born from tragedy." Ortiz nodded but pressed on. "There are concerns. Your past has drawn attention from multiple agencies. Some survivors from those operations have reached out. They want answers. Some view you as a hero. Others question your motives, fearing secrets you hold. And now, with these radiation victims here, the stakes are even higher." Irina met Ortiz's unwavering gaze. "I cannot change my past, nor the system that erased all records of the mobile medical units that handled those cases. We were invisible, treated as liabilities. I defected to escape that life. But the past doesn't let go easily." Ortiz interrupted. "We need transparency. This is not about punishment, but about containment. There are factions within the government who see biological and radiological threats differently from how your treatments suggest." Irina leaned forward, voice resolute. "I am here for one reason. As a healer, I won't let politics or fear dictate who lives." The room was still. The collision of past betrayals, present dangers, and uncertain alliances hung heavy. Outside, whispers of her secret spread among hospital staff and amid the radiation victims' families. Loyalists whispered of battlefield heroism. Skeptics questioned her presence. Social media amplified the storm with viral posts, stirring public curiosity and governmental scrutiny alike. In this crucible of tension, Irina faced a profound choice. Continue hiding in the shadow of her volunteer role or step out, confront the ghosts, and lead the fight with truth as her weapon. With uneasy respect, Ortiz offered a final word. "We'll be watching closely. You're an asset, but assets come with strings." As Ortiz left, Irina exhaled slowly. The battles ahead, medical, political, and personal, had only just begun. Still, one truth remained indelible. Sometimes, the greatest battlefield is the one behind the locked doors of power. And in that war, Irina Vulov was ready to fight. The hospital corridors buzzed with a new kind of energy. Whispers, glances, smartphone screens glowing with shared stories. Irina Vulov's name was no longer just a footnote in volunteer rosters. It had become a rallying cry, a symbol of quiet heroism that social media had amplified beyond the sterile walls of the medical facility. It started with a single post. A radiation survivor from decades ago, now a retired engineer living in Minnesota, shared a grainy photograph of a young woman in Soviet military fatigues, standing beside a makeshift medical tent. The caption read, "This woman saved my life in 1986. I was 7 years old, exposed to cesium during the Chernobyl evacuation. She held me while others ran. Today, I learned she's still saving lives. Her name is Irina Vulov, the Chernobyl angel." Within hours, the post went viral. More survivors emerged from the shadows of history. Men and women scattered across continents, each with a story of a calm, silver-haired doctor who had defied orders, risked her own life, and pulled them back from the edge of death. Testimonies flooded in. Children who grew into parents, firefighters who lived to retire, mothers who carried babies to term against all odds. The hospital's public relations team scrambled to manage the narrative, but it was already beyond their control. News outlets picked up the story. Reporters camped outside the hospital entrance, cameras trained on every door, waiting for a glimpse of the woman who had become an overnight sensation. Irina herself remained elusive, retreating deeper into the routine of her volunteer work, restocking supplies, organizing charts, avoiding eye contact with anyone holding a microphone or a camera. The weight of recognition pressed down on her like radiation itself. Invisible, relentless, inescapable. Paul Hendris found her in a quiet supply closet, organizing bandages with methodical precision. "You can't hide forever," he said gently. "They want to hear from you." "I don't want to be heard," Irina replied, her voice low. "I want to work. The hospital board is calling an emergency meeting. They want to offer you something. A position. Lead disaster preparedness training. Develop protocols for radiological emergencies. They're saying you're the most qualified person in the country." Irina's hands stilled. "I am old. I am tired. I have seen enough death. But you've also seen enough life saved to know you can't walk away now." The meeting room was intimidating. Polished mahogany table, leather chairs, framed certificates of achievement lining the walls. Dr. Marcus Webb sat at the head, flanked by hospital administrators and legal counsel. Irina entered quietly, still wearing her volunteer vest, a deliberate choice that signaled her reluctance to shed her anonymity. "Dr. Vulov," Webb began, his tone respectful but formal. "We've reviewed your credentials, your history, and your recent contributions to this facility. The board unanimously agrees. We want you to lead our disaster medicine program. Full medical license reinstatement, department leadership, resources at your disposal." Irina looked around the table, reading faces. Some hopeful, some skeptical, all expectant. "Why now? Why after I have been invisible for so long?" "Because the world sees what we should have seen all along," Webb admitted. "You're not just a volunteer. You're a pioneer in a field we desperately need to understand." Silence filled the room. Irina's mind raced through memories. The tent 12 kilometers from Chernobyl's reactor. The children she couldn't save. The pregnant women whose babies absorbed radiation meant for their mothers. The scars on her arms that would never fully fade. "I will consider," she said finally, voice steady but guarded. "But I make no promises." Outside, the sun set over the hospital, casting long shadows across the parking lot where reporters still waited. Cameras ready. Questions prepared for the reluctant hero who held the power to change everything. If only she could reconcile with her past enough to embrace the future. The battle for Irina Vulov's soul, between trauma and duty, between hiding and leading, had reached its critical moment. And the outcome was far from certain. Irina Vulov stood again at the edge of her past and present. Her mind a whirlwind of ghosts and memories that refused to fade. The hospital corridors, always bustling with the urgent rhythm of life and death, now echoed with whispers of a history she had never shared openly. She had returned to the Chernobyl exclusion zone one autumn, not as a healer, but as a visitor to the shadows of her former life. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves and the distant crackle of abandoned machinery. The landscape stretched with an eerie stillness, homes frozen in time, playgrounds deserted, a world both haunting and sacred. Her journey brought her face to face with survivors, children once saved from the radioactive flames, now adults bearing the invisible scars of their ordeal. She watched them navigate life's fragile balance, some thriving, others struggling with ailments that medicine barely understood. One man approached her, his voice trembling. "You held me when I was afraid. You were the light when all was dark." Others came with stories, gratitude woven with loss, tales of a past burdened by secrecy and erased records. In a small village, she met Katya, a woman she remembered from the mobile medical unit. Katya had chosen to carry her pregnancy to term, a choice that had come with unbearable cost. They spoke in hushed tones about impossible decisions, about the relentless weight of motherhood and memory. Back in the hospital, Irina faced a new threat, an incoming wave of radiation exposure, this time from a suspected bioterror incident. The walls seemed to close in as she coordinated preparations, her voice calm but resolute amid the rising tide of fear. She was no longer the invisible volunteer. She was a commander, a survivor, a bearer of knowledge few dared to claim. With each life saved, the ghosts of her past eased their grip, replaced by the fierce determination to build a future where no one would be lost to silence again. But the war was far from over, and as the new alarms blared, Irina Vulov knew that the true test of her legacy was only just beginning. The hospital conference room filled with murmurs and the clicking of cameras. Today was the turning point everyone had been waiting for. Irina Vulov stood quietly as her story, once deeply buried in shadows, was finally recognized for what it was: a testament to survival, resilience, and unwavering courage. The press conference opened with hospital administrators praising her leadership in managing the recent radiation emergency, highlighting how her expertise had been crucial in saving lives that many believed impossible to save. Flashbulbs popped as she entered, a slender figure wearing a modest lab coat, carrying the weight of decades of hidden sacrifice. Journalists' questions flew: her past at Chernobyl, her defection from the Soviet Union, the years spent invisible in America. And through it all, Irina answered with a quiet strength that transcended words. She spoke of the liquidators, the firefighters with burning skin and hollow eyes, of children she held as they trembled through radiation sickness, and of the impossible choices forced upon her and her team in those life-and-death moments. Her narrative struck a chord far beyond the hospital walls. Veterans of military medical units reached out, sharing stories of courage and survival linked to her leadership. Social media buzzed, creating hashtags like #Chernobyl Angel and Radiation Hero, turning Irina into a symbol of hope and the quiet heroism often overlooked. At the same time, government agencies formally recognized her unique knowledge. They declassified files, acknowledging the gaps in official records that had tried to erase the suffering and bravery of those who had dealt with nuclear catastrophe firsthand. The hospital awarded her an official medical license reinstatement, enabling her to lead nationwide training programs on radiological emergencies. Irina was hesitant, but accepted the role, knowing that the path forward meant balancing her desire for anonymity with the responsibility her expertise demanded. Amid the public recognition, personal moments echoed deeply. A young resident, eyes wide with admiration, approached her after the conference and quietly asked, "How did you bear it all, seeing so much loss, carrying those scars alone?" Irina smiled faintly. "We heal where we can and carry the rest in silence. But now, it's time to break that silence." As she stepped outside, the sunlight felt different, softer yet more urgent. She was no longer the forgotten volunteer, but a beacon of resilience, a living bridge between past tragedies and future preparedness. The battle for recognition was won, but the real work, empowering others to face the unseen dangers ahead, had only just begun. In the distance, the hospital's emergency alarms blared again. Irina Vulov's eyes narrowed with determination, because her story and her fight were far from over. Irina Vulov's seminar room was filled from wall to wall, the air thick with anticipation and respect. It was a far cry from the quiet volunteer station she once inhabited. Today, she stood at the center of a new movement, ushering in a legacy not just of survival, but of education and resilience. Veterans, medical professionals, and refugees alike gathered, their eyes fixed on the woman they now called the Chernobyl Angel. Some had heard her story through viral posts and news coverage. Others sought her out in desperate hope, knowing that her expertise bridged decades of silent medical warfare against radiation's invisible enemy. Irina spoke with calm authority about disaster preparedness, the nuances of radiological treatment, and the ethical challenges of triage in environments where medicine often meant improvisation under life-or-death constraints. Her hands, once trembling with suppressed memories, now moved with assured gestures, illustrating techniques and protocols shaped by fire and loss. Between slides and anecdotes, she shared lessons drawn from the trenches of Chernobyl and battlefields in the Soviet Union, stories that shocked, inspired, and educated her audience. Yet beneath the measured voice lay the vulnerability of a woman still haunted by the lives she could not save. Outside the seminar room, reporters waited for glimpses and sound bites. Each question from a curious journalist was met with delicate balance, just enough truth to inspire, but guarded enough to protect the fragile peace she'd carved out. Her newfound prominence stirred complex emotions. Some colleagues embraced her, eager to learn and to follow. Others viewed the attention warily, whispers of envy and suspicion weaving through hospital corridors. At night, when the city lights flickered below her modest apartment, Irina often found herself staring at the scars still faintly visible under her sleeves. The memories of children, the painful sacrifices, and the ghosts of pregnant women who never fully emerged from the storm pressed close. Yet with each seminar, each life touched, Irina felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was no longer alone in her fight. The network she fostered promised a future where no patient would be abandoned to ignorance or fear. Her voice, once drowned in invisibility, now echoed through halls and hearts. And with every word spoken, Irina Vulov was finally reclaiming her rightful place, both as a healer and as the living legacy of those whose names had been lost to time. Irina Vulov's final chapter at the hospital was filled with purpose and renewal. She stood in a modest room surrounded by fresh faces, young doctors, nurses, and medics inspired by her resilience and knowledge. Her role had transformed from the solitary volunteer to a mentor shaping the future of disaster medicine. The legacy she was building extended beyond healing individual patients. It was a network, a living institution designed to prepare and protect against the invisible threats she had spent a lifetime battling. Irina's lessons were etched with the hard-won wisdom of Chernobyl's fires, of impossible choices made under crushing pressure, and of lives saved against overwhelming odds. Her scars, once hidden beneath sleeves, now symbolized stories of courage shared openly in the lecture halls and simulation labs. New protocols she helped develop wove together decades of experience, bridging Cold War secrets with modern medicine's advances. Amid this growth, personal moments revealed the depth of her journey. A young doctor, newly inspired, approached her one late evening in the hospital corridor. "You taught us that medicine is as much about heart as it is about knowledge. How did you choose to keep fighting when the weight of your past was so heavy?" Irina smiled softly, eyes reflecting seasons of sorrow and strength. "Because silence only buries pain. Speaking out, standing tall. That is how healing truly begins." The hospital, once a place where she moved unseen, now echoed with stories carrying her name. Patients, colleagues, and strangers alike saw in her a beacon of hope and perseverance, a living testament that even amidst tragedy, the human spirit could rise, endure, and inspire. Her story closed not with an end, but with a beginning, a legacy carried forward in every life, touched by her wisdom, and every hand she guided through the shadows of disaster. Irina Vulov had become more than a survivor. She was a guardian, a teacher, a symbol of resilience forged in nuclear fire. And her fight to save lives was just the start of a far-reaching impact yet to come.